In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, a recent sighting of UFOs off the coast of San Diego have been identified. A cryptozoologist suggests Bigfoot might be a tribe of inbred humanoids. Then we dive into what is considered one of the best UFO sightings of the 20th century, the Mansfield Coyne UFO incident of 1973. There's even a point in the episode where we discuss the unlikely coincidence of two men with the same first name. They even shared the same first name. And what were the chances of that? And it was this story.
What was the name?
John.
I missed that part. Well, I mean, the way you said it, I was thinking an odd name.
No,
what
that's
are the
the
chances
joke.
of that? I should have known better.
You should have.
Please continue. I'm on the edge of my seat. Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we discuss weird wonders in the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
Tonight we are looking at the Mansfield UFO incident. Many people consider this to be the most well-documented UFO incident out there. Often it'll hit the top 10 lists, top 20 at least, in most books as being the most believable, I think would be the right word for it. But before we get into that, Jimmy, what you been up to lately, man?
Well, you know, I've been up to the normal humdrum drone of life, going to work and mowing the lawn. Nothing exciting, but I do have a really large Bigfoot now in my room, just across from me here, and I'm making a video. One of our listeners made him for us, and he is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. This young artist crafted this Bigfoot for us, and he and I are going to go out into the woods and do a couple of videos.
Really, man? That's cool.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
A listener made it for us?
Yeah, one of our listeners made it for us, and it's it's here. His name's Jack, and thank you, Jack. Really appreciate that, man. And I can't wait to get it out in the woods and have a look at it. So,
yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. I'm really curious about what you've been into lately.
Well, it's summertime. Yeah. And of course, I love the summer. It's no secret that I love being outside until the sun goes down. And oddly enough, I would like to mention that the past 3 episodes that we've recorded, ever since we did Tesla, in that episode we said that he was born allegedly during a thunder and lightning storm. It's a thunder and lightning storm right now.
Again?
This is ever since then, we've had a thunder and lightning storm while
can't be a coincidence.
This episode. Yeah. It's kind of strange. But anyway, that's one reason we've been a little bit slow getting some episodes out because it's totally my fault. Jimmy's been ready to record, but I've been out soaking up the sun, doing outdoorsy stuff. So
yeah, I say I've been ready to go, but every time you call and said, I can't do it, I'm be like, okay, that's fine with me.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, what I've been trying to do is stay out just a little bit past dark, hoping to see some maybe weird lights in the sky or something like that. Mm-hmm. Nothing yet. I mean, it would be cool. We talk about this stuff all the time, and I'm sure as anybody else that looks into this subject matter, or whether it's Bigfoot or other cryptids or UFOs or ghosts or whatever, you know, you wish you would see it, right? Because you're interested in it.
Chupacabra.
For instance, there was these series of lights recently spotted over San Diego, and there's a few videos of this. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I've seen these.
Yeah. Okay. So the story is from June 28th, which is just a couple of days ago. It shows this series of bright lights over San Diego, shared online on this past Monday. A lot of the locals speculated it was UFOs over the Pacific Ocean. The residents noticed a glow in the sky near Mission Beach and the city's Paradise Hills neighborhood. One person said they spotted up to 5 balls of light flying over the ocean. They said the lights kept going for around an hour. It's reported that there were no military or commercial planes in the sky at the time. That's according to one of the local news stations, ABC Channel 7. The strange footage fueled a flurry of speculation on social media, and one person said there are some wild lights floating over downtown San Diego. Does anyone know if it's the 4th of July related, or the Navy, or do I get to believe it's finally aliens visiting us?
I hate to bust your bubble on that one. But it was
Oh,
a
what is
planned
it?
military exercise. Those were flares that were dropped from high altitude. They used parachutes on them, which is why they hung in the air for such a long time. And yeah, it turned out it ended up being just a planned exercise of lights, which
Yeah, I watched the video. I thought it looked a little flarish.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Later in the story, it was revealed that that's what it was. Of course, that's what the government says it was.
Exactly.
You know, it's,
You never
we
know.
You know, that's just their cover story, no doubt. You know, Men in Black spreading it.
It was a weather balloon. It was an asteroid. It was a meteoroid.
Yeah, it was Venus.
It was Venus. Venus just happened to move around a little bit.
Oh, and I forgot to tell you, did you know that trees ain't real?
Trees ain't real.
Yeah, trees ain't real. I learned this on Jason Rule's podcast, The Esoteric Book Club.
Okay. Has Jason been hitting the the ayahuasca?
All I can say is if you want to know why trees ain't real, you have to tune in and download the episode.
Well, I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm going to now because I want to know why trees aren't real.
Right. And the Esoteric Book Club, our friend of the show, Jason Rule, he's been on 2 or 3 times, and we're going to have him again real soon. It's a good podcast. His latest one with the news stories, a real good coverage of some really cool stuff. So check it out.
Will do.
So what have you been up to?
So I got this Bigfoot, right? And it inspired me to go search for some Bigfoot news that you can hang your hat on. Something that has some solid evidence.
You mean like a Bigfoot statue that I could put like next to my door? And
I'm talking about an actual Bigfoot.
Metaphorical hat. Okay.
I'm talking about a real hat on a real Bigfoot. This comes from the Daily Star. The headline reads, Bigfoot sightings could be hairy inbred humans with bird feet and claw hands.
Well, maybe that is Bigfoot. Inbred humans.
Right.
Man, did you post this story?
Not yet. A Bigfoot and humanoid researcher says terrifying sightings may be of isolated inbred tribes, people born with several genetic abnormalities like excessive hair and bird feet.
Oh, come on.
No.
Who said that?
No, okay, so I actually learned something.
I learned something today.
Bigfooting sightings around the world could simply be humans from remote inbred tribes who spent generations becoming more and more savage, a prominent cryptozoologist has claimed. And this comes from Andy McGrath.
I want to know who this prominent zoologist is.
His name's Andy McGrath. You know, old man McGrath's boy. He's penned several books on myths, rumors, and reports of the unknown, and crucial to his work is approaching countless half-man, half-ape tales with a degree of skepticism in a bid to make sense of these outlandish claims. So, Andy claims that various folktales similar to Bigfoot around the world, the giant swamp-dwelling Nogoloko in East Africa, or the mountain-stalking Alamaste of South America, could in fact be people born with physical abnormalities caused by inbreeding. And they have a picture here of this African tribe.
What about the skunk ape?
But
Could it be a skunk ape?
Nah, skunk ape's just regular Mississippi people that have bathed in a couple of days.
We have listeners in Mississippi, man.
Yeah, but, we're from West Virginia. They make fun of us. Fair game, Mississippi boys. Come get me.
Yeah, we're always competing. We're like, hey, at least we beat Mississippi.
We're competing for last place.
Yeah.
Screw the rest of you 48 states.
It's always between us and Mississippi.
We're number 1 and number 2. Okay.
Most illiterate, most unhealthy,
Hey, you just described me. So, okay. So they have a picture here of the children of the Vandoma tribe in Kenya, and they're born with ostrich feet. They're literally born with ostrich feet.
You're making this
No,
up,
you
man.
got to see it to believe it, baby. I mean, it's like I'm doing this, listeners, if you could see me right now, I'm just sort of pointing in two different directions. That's the way their feet go. They don't have like four toes. They have these appendages that go off like ostrich feet. And this is the Bandoma tribe, a real thing, I guess. And then it's also possible that the Nogoloko represent an example, an undiscovered inbred tribe that possibly have the same features that the Bandoma tribe have of two-toed ostrich foot condition. There's also the possibility that the Alamaste is another legendary human-like creature said to inhabit the Caucasus and Pamir Mountains of Central Asia and the Altai Mountains of Western Mongolia. And they believe it might be due to a strain of hypertrichosis, which is also known as the werewolf syndrome. That's where you get a lot of hair on your body. And they believe that that's what might be going on there with the remote tribe, where it's just bred into the or inbred into the tribe.
Well, I've heard that idea before. There's a few issues, though. For one thing, Bigfoot is called Bigfoot for a reason. It's very large. I don't know that the human body, I mean, we've seen giantism in humans before, Andre the Giant, or the tallest man. Mm-hmm. We looked him up. He lived in 1930s and 40s, but he died very young. He was, 27 or something like that, had to wear knee braces and all this. So the human body's not built to be as big as Bigfoot is, reportedly.
Well, wait a minute. Nobody's ever seen
10 feet tall.
Nobody's ever seen him. They've only seen his feet.
And that's not true.
Not even his feet.
There's been plenty of sightings.
They see shadowy figures, and shadowy figures don't necessarily equate.
No, some people have seen Bigfoot clear as day. It's just there's not a lot of photographic evidence.
Yeah,
but I mean, we do. But I don't know. I think the odds of there being a human tribe, because human are social animals and that sort of thing, I just think it would be extremely. I think it more likely, if Bigfoot is real, to be more of a solitary type hominid. You know, for instance, how solitary.
You can't get more inbred than that.
Bears can be.
You can't get more inbred than that. I mean, that's really super inbreeding right there.
All right, man. So that's quite interesting, and I'm looking for. Be sure and post that on Facebook. So listeners, most of the stories, or all the stories, that we generally post them on our Facebook page. So look for Cosmic Sponge. Join our news group, Cosmic Sponge Theorists, and that way you can have these stories and many others in your inbox. I try to update it at least 2 or 3 times a week and get some interesting stories. Also, look for Jimmy's Instagram, because it's pretty funny. You get to see his warped sense of humor. But while you're at it, go to our webpage, CosmicSponge.com. There you can find the web store where you can buy some cool memorabilia. Like, for instance, Jimmy's wearing, as we speak, a Cosmic Sponge t-shirt, which has the monkeys on it, and one of them's getting ready to touch the sponge monolith. I always say that's Jimmy. I'm the other one saying, not yet. So don't touch that thing.
It looked like cheese.
But anyway, yeah, look for that. And then also we're on Patreon. So there's a link on our webpage for that if you would like to help us out and help support the show. If you do subscribe to Patreon, we produce a show called Weird Wonders that's exclusively for our Patreon supporters. So you gain access to that and some other things that go along with the program. But most of all, you'd be helping us out, and we would really appreciate it. And also, there's the coffee cup icon. You can click on that for Buy Me a Coffee, and that is for a one-time donation. So anyway, but check out our webpage. There's fun stuff on there and links to all of the Instagram, Facebook, and other things. So let's move on to tonight's main topic. As I said at the beginning of the show, this is going to be on the Mansfield UFO incident. This occurred in 1973 with a military helicopter and is considered one of the most documented and credible UFO cases on record. And Jimmy, I know you've done a little legwork on this one. Why don't you get us kicked off tonight on the Mansfield UFO incident?
The events I'm about to describe are a historical fact and recount what is considered one of the most convincing UFO encounters of the 20th century. The crab-like hand wrapped on the window of John Lane's taxi. He wanted to escape, But only moments earlier, the approach of the Crabman's strange craft had caused his cab to stall and the radio to go dead. The trauma of the event was totally worth it, though, when he saw himself on the CBS Evening News, anchored by Walter Cronkite, where he was aired next to the likes of the governor of Ohio, John Gilligan, who had also recently had his very own UFO encounter. They even shared the same first name. And what were the chances of that? And it was this story.
What was the name?
John.
I missed that part. Well, I mean, the way you said it, I was thinking an odd name. But
No,
what are the chances
joke.
of that? I should have known better.
You should have.
Please continue. I'm on the edge of my seat.
And it was this story, the one that the governor of Ohio had recounted about his experience with a UFO, that the men on the Army Reserve UH-1 helicopter were discussing earlier in the day on October the 16th. On October the 18th of 1973. UFOs were rampant in the news once again, and the recent sighting by the governor of Ohio had the locals speculating once again. The four men, Captain Lawrence Coyne, Lieutenant Arrigo Jesse, Sergeant John Healy, and Robert Yannick, were National Guard reservists headed back to Cleveland, Ohio after receiving and passing medical examinations clearing them for duty. They took off from the Columbus airport at 10:30 for the brief flight back to Cleveland, Ohio. They were at the halfway point when Jesse noticed a red light to the east, which appeared to be parallel to them. At this point, they were approximately 8 miles due east of Mansfield, Ohio. Cruising at 90 knots at an altitude of 2,500 feet, visibility was 15 miles. Initially, the co-pilot had the controls, but as the red light started to approach the helicopter, Captain Coyne took over. Having more flight experience and a better vantage for which to view the approaching object, Coyne took decisive action. Anticipating a collision, he pushed the helicopter down at a rate of 1,000 feet per minute. As they descended, the craft could be seen overhead, blocking out the stars and reflecting light off its metallic surface. It appeared to be cigar-shaped, with the red light changing to a green one, lighting up the cockpit of the helicopter. While they had been descending, Coyne viewed the altimeter. After the green light faded from the cockpit, they found that they had instead ascended to 3,500 feet. They continued to ascend another 300 feet before Coyne was able to gain control and return the copter to the standard cruising altitude of 2,500 feet. The craft disappeared to the west at extraordinary speed. Coyne returned the helicopter to cruising altitude and skipped refueling at Mansfield, proceeding on to Cleveland, landing on an empty tank. They immediately reported the event to local news outlets and to their superiors. That's the story, at least as it was told initially, of the Mansfield UFO. What do you think, Steve?
It is pretty extraordinary because this UFO had the 4 witnesses in the helicopter.
That's correct.
It's pretty extraordinary because you have the 4 witnesses inside the helicopter, the green light shining in. They're all military people, which always seems to carry a little more weight than the average citizen. Pilots, for instance, used to being in the sky and seeing things in the sky. But the most astonishing thing about this is you have their witness accounts of the men in the helicopter, but then it is corroborated by people on the ground that saw this craft with the helicopter. It's hard to debunk this one out, I think, when you have the 4 witnesses in the helicopter, military personnel, and then you have witnesses on the ground that are unrelated in any way, shape, or form, just civilians, but they reported seeing a strange incident as well.
Yeah, I think we should probably start with some of the details I left out. So when the object, the red light, was approaching them, Captain Coyne got onto the radio and contacted the Mansfield airport tower. And they were supposed to land there and refuel. But they were so shooken up by this incident, they just wanted to get back to Cleveland, and they felt they had enough fuel to do that safely. So they just skipped the refueling and went on back to Cleveland. But they contacted the Mansfield radio tower requesting information about whether or not there was anything else in the air with them. Specifically, he asked if there were any fighter jets in the area because he felt that the speed at which this light was traveling was equivalent to that you would only see with a fighter jet. Before he could get a response, the radio goes out. Also, the compass in the helicopter goes out as well.
Which is very common in UFO sightings.
Right.
Luckily, the helicopter didn't fail. I guess it did drop altitude, though. There were some issues there, right? Mechanical issues with the helicopter, or did he actually descend?
He forced it down because he was trying to avoid a collision. But while he was going down, he looks at his altimeter, and he's at 1,700 feet. And then the next time he looks at it after this green light passes through the cockpit, he's at 3,500 feet. So he ascended at an incredible rate to a new altitude without, at least from his perception of doing it himself, it just happened.
Yeah. I would like to point out that if his other instruments were not functioning correctly, were being affected by this craft, then I think it's highly likely that his altimeter could have been affected as well. I mean, it's something to think about. I mean, it could have just been a misperception because he was in the sky at night. But regardless, still an extraordinary encounter. I think it's worth pointing out, too, that in the UFO world and people that study these things and keep track of UFOs and flying saucers, there are certain years and times that have been called flaps. And what that means is that it's a very busy season for UFOs. It's usually in the summer, but on the other hand, maybe more people's outside and cookouts and things like that too. Just like I had mentioned at the beginning of the show, I stay outside in the summertime. I love summer, particularly May and June and July. I like the long days, and I try to spend as much time outside as I can. It's no wonder that more UFOs are seen in the summertime. But 1973 is one of those years that is considered a flap. It was a very busy year. I even remember being a kid and seeing a lot of UFO stories on the national news. You know, not just a local news for some local sighting or whatever. It was a big deal. The busiest year on record was 1955, I believe, either 53 or 55, and it was the same. Maybe 52. It was the same year that the White House, the lights were over the White House and everything. But they kind of settled down after that, and sightings went down. I think 68 or something, they went up a little bit, and then they went down again. And then 1973, we had a huge UFO flap. I just think that's worth mentioning that, you know, the sightings all over the world were way up. It's interesting, you know, just that little facet of it. You know, why is that? I mean, it's easy to speculate or let your mind wander if they are visitors from another world or something. You know, is this like another wave, or does it take a certain amount of time to get here? Or
it's an alien tour group.
Yeah, or a different group. Like the guys in the 50s may have been a different species exploring the Earth or whatever, and then these guys are somebody new. Yeah, I don't know. I find it fascinating though.
It's an alien cruise ship. We're going to anchor here over by Sidron, and then we're going to send out a little excursion down to this planet full of hairless apes that like making little trinkets.
And they've invented rotary winged aircraft, and tonight we're planning to buzz one. Let's go.
Hold my beer. Watch this shit. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the ground witnesses, a couple of them. First of all, we have Jim Carver and his family who were driving to their rural home just outside of Mansfield. Along with Jim were his 3 siblings and his mother, Emma. It was shortly after 11 p.m. when they noticed a strange red light in the sky above them. It appeared to get closer. Same thing that they saw in the helicopter. Emma turned the car onto Route 430, and as she did so, both she and her 4 children could now see 2 lights above. One was red, the other green. As each of them watched the lights in fascination, they noticed the sound of an approaching helicopter. Emma pulled the car to the side of the road, and she and her children stepped out to watch the events above. They could also see the huge cigar-shaped object hovering over the helicopter. Suddenly, they witnessed a bright green light shoot out from the underside and bathe not only the entire cockpit in fluorescent green, but everything in sight. The woods, the car, everything turned green, including the witnesses below that were looking up at this light. I hope they didn't burn their retinas out.
Yeah, how powerful would that have had to have been?
Yeah.
And just think, those guys in the helicopter, it's right above them, and it's this incredibly bright green light is shining straight down on them like that.
Yeah, it's well, something to think about, I guess. Yeah, it lit up everything. Woods, car, witnesses. things in the bottom of the car, floorboards, everything. And then, as the crew reported, after a few seconds, the light went out and the object just moved away, casting a brief flash of bright white light as it did. That was the single ground witness at the time that the event took place. Now, 15 years later, in 1988, a new witness came forward with additional information. Janine Elias from the southeast of Mansfield area recalled laying in bed watching the 11 o'clock news when the sound of an extremely low-flying helicopter made her stop watching her television. Now, she was used to low-flying aircraft near her house as she was only 6 miles away from the Mansfield airport. However, this aircraft sounded lower than normal, and she feared that it might imminently crash into her house. As she panicked, she hid her head under the pillow because that's the best way to protect yourself from a helicopter crash into your house. And she could hear her teenage son, John, calling from her from his room next door.
Wait a minute. His name was John as well?
Coincidence? I think not.
This is getting weird.
Yeah, lots of Johns. What's the chances? The loud rumbling sound
Continue, please.
The loud rambling sound had awoken him, and a bright green light filled his entire room from outside. So just like, the helicopter people, Emma and her kids.
Yeah.
So following an appeal in the Mansfield News Journal in 2015 for more witnesses to come forward, lo and behold, more people did. One was Brian Stevens, who at the time of the incident was only 13 years old, and he could recall seeing a red-orange ball that he just couldn't take his eyes off of as he walked along Ohio 39 at 11 o'clock at night at age 13. Another witness, Glenn Stout, worked Mansfield Tire. He and several co-workers were on a break at the back of the dock when a crazy-looking light sped towards the helicopter, nearly crashing into it. One particularly bizarre detail offered by Stout was his home electric bill for the month following the incidents was only $4. He wondered if the surprisingly low bill had a connection to the UFO overhead.
I wish I'd have a couple of UFOs come through in the wintertime in particular.
Heck yeah, come down here.
Only $4.
Judith Ham was yet another person. Judith Ham was another person who witnessed the bizarre events in October of 1973. She claimed to have almost screamed out loud when she witnessed what she thought was two planes about to crash into each other. Ham believed it was a military plane until reading stories of the encounter afterward. Not anything military, lists Kaiser, who was 13 years old at the time of the sighting, would witness the strange events from his back garden along with his 30-year-old sister. Wait a minute. Let's do a little math here, listeners. This kid's 13 years old, and his sister's 30 years old. His dad has got to be like, 112.
Yeah, maybe it's a stepsister.
Okay, let's go with that. As they were doing chores in the yard, a huge oval-shaped craft came into view over them. There were two red lights on the object, which suddenly vanished to be replaced by an intensely bright green light. He could clearly see the helicopter in front of the craft, glowing in the green waves. Kaiser felt immediately it was a UFO. His sister, however, would state to him that it's probably military. Don't say anything to anyone about it. He would tell the Mansfield News Journal in 2015, I know what I saw and it wasn't nothing military. His sister's warning, however, wasn't entirely lost unless he wouldn't talk about it until the appeal for witnesses through the newspaper was announced in 2015. Later, he would state that the experience was so strong for me that I never lost it in my mind.
Yeah, I know there also were some, because there were some 911 calls come into the sheriff's department. And I know later there were some police officers who chose to stay silent at the time of the incident, the lights in the sky and the helicopter and everything, and decided to stay quiet, because they were worried about their jobs. As you often hear, professional police officers don't want everybody, making fun of them and thinking they're crazy. They want to keep their jobs. And, so apparently there were several that came forward later after they retired, corroborated some more of this. I saw this crew interviewed on, there's some videos out available online, and you can actually see Major Coyne being interviewed and talking about it. And one thing that struck me was they said that light and the craft was so close, they kept waiting for the rotor blades to hit it. They just thought for sure it was going to, despite their evasive action and dropping altitude, they said it was just literally right on top of them. He said it just had to be just, a few feet between this object and the spinning rotor blades on the top of the helicopter.
Yeah, so I've read this several different ways. So I've heard it's and I just want to clear this up. So I've read this as Captain Coyne, Major Coyne. Are these being told at different points in his career where he's gone from one rank to the other?
I'm with you on that. My assumption is I didn't put a ton of thought into that. Maybe you should. Maybe I should have. Considering, hey, we're supposed to be investigating these things and question discrepancies. But my assumption is that during the incident, he was captain, but later was promoted to major.
I think that's the case. I'm looking here, and that appears to be the case. So, this seems like a valid UFO, right?
It's very difficult to explain this one away, I think. However, I'm quite certain, being that it's such a famous case and brought a great deal of attention to the subject of UFOs, it seems irrefutable that this happened, what these people witnessed. If it were anything else, people would believe it, right? I mean, if they said, hey, man, an airplane, a light aircraft almost hit my helicopter, nobody would doubt that, especially if there were witnesses on the ground. So, yeah, I saw that airplane. It almost hit these guys' helicopter. But because it's a UFO or something unidentified or something strange, the Philip Classes of the world have to come out of the woodwork. And let me guess, it was ball lightning?
Oh, you're going to love this. I want to go through the skeptics. But I want to start with
I haven't read it. I wanted you to read it to me because you do the Philip Class so well.
I love Philip Class. He's my favorite skeptic. Insert sarcasm here. Quote from Mr. Philip J. Class. My investigation suggests that the UFO was a meteor fireball from the annual Orionids meteor shower, which was near its peak activity on October 18th. When I suggested this to Coyne during an early telephone interview, he responded, well, that would sound like a logical explanation. Philip J. Class.
Really?
Well, that's what he says.
Coyne said he thought that sounded like a reasonable explanation.
Well, that's what Philip Class says. Who knows?
Oh, I see. I will point out, though, I find it interesting that it has the... Never mind. I thought it had the spurting stuff when I was looking at the drawing, because that always makes me think it's probably a meteor, too, and they're just... imagining a ship in front of it, like what do they call those meteors that skim through the atmosphere and then go back out into space? Because they actually look, if you're in a plane, they look as if they're coming down and then going up, right? Because they're going so fast, but they're really kind of just skimming through the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And I know that's a likely explanation for the airline flight back in the 1940s. Remember the DC-3? I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
Whited and one of the others. But they saw a ship, corroborated their story before they got on the ground. Agreed it had windows and all these things, but it had the flame shooting out like a Buck Rogers.
Oh, yeah. I remember
ship.
that one.
It just makes you wonder. You know what I mean?
So
when you do hear of the rocket ship type sightings, I think that's reasonable. But on the other hand, we're talking about something completely different.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. So I researched the story and I looked at it, and the thing that stuck out to me when I first heard it was the red light, green light.
Right.
So of all of the lights in all the electromagnetic spectrum, of all the visible light spectrum, we're talking red and green. These just happen to be the two colors that are used, left wing on a plane, right wing on a plane.
Good point.
Right? So I'm like, okay, but I mean, these are experienced military pilots. Would they have somehow misinterpreted this UFO so that it's a UFO, not a plane? Could that have happened? Maybe. So I did a little bit more research, and I found a incredibly detailed hypotheses about what these men actually saw on a site called Parabunk. And they did an extraordinarily thorough review of this encounter, which makes me think they got it right.
Let's hear it.
So what happened on October the 8th of 1973 at approximately 11 p.m. when this Army Reserve Huey helicopter with a crew of 4, Coyne, Jesse, Healy, and Yannicksek, were flying from Columbus to Cleveland. They were cruising 90 knots at 2,500 feet, and they were close to Mansfield, Ohio. So what Healy saw, he was the first one to see it, was a single red light to the west, heading south, which seemed a little bit brighter than the typical left side navigation light of a plane. What he actually saw was the left side navigation light of an aerial refueling aircraft that was headed south.
This has been confirmed that aircraft was in the vicinity.
This is the hypothesis. This is what he's speculating.
Did they confirm that there was a refueling aircraft in the vicinity?
They weren't able to. And there's good reason for that. And they go into the details on it. It's pretty detailed. This guy did a lot of work and actually did the hard work of actually contacting the military, the air traffic controls, getting the tapes, getting the detailed information from the original sources at the time it was taken. So he had everything when if
he had all the cockpit data, or if he had all of the air control data, he would know what aircraft were in the area.
Interesting enough, not necessarily.
Okay. Well, continue with the hypothesis.
Yeah. So after 3 or 4 minutes, Yannicksek saw it on the other side of the plane, now traveling north parallel to them, and it seemed as if it were pacing the helicopter. And then after another minute, he reported it to Coyne, who after another 30 seconds announced it's closing in on the helicopter. It seemed to be getting brighter and brighter and to be on a collision course coming from the right with an estimated speed of about 600 knots. Coyne began to descend to avoid a collision and increase his airspeed from their 90-knot cruising speed to 100 knots. Instead of colliding, the light began to hover over the helicopter for a brief while, and the crew saw a big cigar-shaped gray metallic object, which had a red light at its nose and a green light at the back. Ground witnesses similarly saw a red light being followed by a green one, coming from east and eventually hovering over top of the helicopter. Coyne drew a picture of it and showed a dome on top of the cigar-shaped flying saucer type of thing. And then suddenly a powerful green light began to swing over the helicopter's nose, emanating through the windshield, and then the green light tinted upper window panels, bathing the cockpit in a green light. Ground witnesses also reported how the light painted the helicopter and ground below in green. After some seconds, the light turned off and the object began accelerating to the west, showing only a white tail light. Most of them estimated it gained a speed of several hundred knots and watched how it took a 45-degree turn right close to Mansfield as it was disappearing to the horizon. The helicopter crew hadn't followed their altimeter for several minutes, being in a state of panic and concentrating on the events around them. They noticed that their altimeter showed that they had climbed from their last known altitude of 1,700 feet to 3,500 feet at a rate of 1,000 feet per minute. They believed the object had pulled them up, and Coyne tried to descend, but the helicopter still kept ascending for another 300 feet, after which they felt a bump and apparent turbulence. As the turbulence began to ease, they finally managed to lower the helicopter back to its normal 2,500 feet cruising altitude. So this is the story that is mind-boggling. And if we break it down step by step, this is what this author believes actually happened.
Okay, let's go.
Healy, when he sees the red light on the left side of the navigation light of the was an aerial refueling aircraft, and it was headed south. And this is on the west side to the left of the helicopter as they're heading north. The refueling plane, begins a 180-degree turn around behind them and comes up on their right. The plane flew almost as slow as the helicopter, almost in the same direction, descending closer to refueling position. Anxious and lacking visual reference points, the crew misjudged the trajectory and speed of the plane. The helicopter seemed to begin to descend according to usual refueling protocols for increasing and hence better matching the speed of the tanker plane with a minimum refueling speed of 100 knots, which is how I guess they operate.
Right. Well, like probably a KC-130, I would imagine.
That's exactly what they're talking about. Yep.
You know, it has to go so fast to stay in the air.
Yep.
Right. A helicopter, which has that long refueling probe that sticks out past the rotor blades, they don't fly very fast, so he would have to actually try to descend a bit to gain some airspeed.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I'll continue.
So since the witnesses mistook the relative sideways movement as the real one, they thought the left navigation light was the front and the right was the back, and saw the wings as the fuselage and possibly the actual fuselage or some other part as the dome from the upwards angle. The anti-collision lights were off. The tanker crew noticed something was not right, such as the helicopter missing the necessary refueling probe or didn't behave as it should at that stage. They turned their white searchlight on to see what's underneath, painting the inside of the helicopter green due to its green-tinted plexiglass panels above the pilots. Ground witnesses saw the greens inside of the light against the green of the forest background, getting the impression of a green light whose actual source was behind the helicopter. Realizing the mistake, the tanker crew took off the searchlight, left with the actual tail light or a refueling pod light on, and began to increase their speed and altitude, and they began to turn somewhat towards the west, but were actually still flying mostly towards the north, which the helicopter crew once again misjudged due to the relative movement and change of altitude and the parallax effect. The tanker plane caused the wingtip vortices behind it, but initially the helicopter was close and low enough not to be affected. While it moved towards the left and further away, those reached the helicopter, causing upwards airflow. Coyne might have also touched the controls in a state of confusion so that the resulting climb could be a combination of both of those reasons. Eventually, they hit the turbulent air as they didn't understand the situation and didn't know there were vortices to avoid.
So their story is this tanker was assuming that the helicopter needed to be refueled, and they put themselves in position to refuel the aircraft. And then the helicopter crew was unaware that this plane was coming in to refuel them. They noticed they didn't have the refueling probe, which really wasn't that common on helicopters in the 1970s. You see them pretty often now, but back in those days, I don't think it was very common practice to refuel a helicopter in the air. I think it's a very reasonable explanation.
There's more.
The only problem I have is it seems like with this being such a big case, the crew or someone would have been able to corroborate this story and say, "Oh no, that was us," unless they were worried they would get in trouble or something. But it seems like there would be radar data and things like that would confirm that this aircraft was there with them.
So several new information came out about this. One is that Mansfield did not get radar until 1982. And the radar for Cleveland did not reach as far south as that for Mansfield. The height that the helicopter was flying at explains why the radio shut down and they weren't able to communicate with the Mansfield Tower. Philip Klass actually comes in here and does something useful for a change. He has Coyne fly that distance again at that altitude and see if he could contact the radio tower. And he couldn't because he was too low. I don't know how that works, but apparently Coyne confirms that he wasn't able to radio in because he was at a height that was too low for him to transmit.
Being obstructed by the curvature of the earth. Mm-hmm. If you're up higher,
It's only 8 miles, I would think. For whatever reason, he confirmed that was the case. So that explains the radio. Jesse confirms that the compass never really worked in that helicopter, and that helicopter was very prone to having problems both with its radio and with its compass, and they had to replace the entire unit.
But I find it interesting, and a lot of aircraft have issues with their compass. I mean, you hear it all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, whenever we looked at the Bermuda Triangle story of the, Flight 19, those planes were notorious, as many aircraft were in those days, of their compasses being unreliable. And maybe we have another case here where, it's a well-known fact that in these Huey helicopters, as they're affectionately known, they have an issue with their compasses. But then why point it out during this sighting? I mean, who points that out, that the compass wasn't working? If the compass wasn't working before or was unreliable, then I think it would be a moot point. But somebody in the reporting of this reported that, hey, the compass wasn't working correctly suddenly. So it seems like it would have been If it's something that's always broke, then why bring it up? It's like if the radio didn't work at all, and then say, well, the radio doesn't work half the time anyway, so that it was probably just not working, or the compass.
Yeah, hard to say.
But anyway, it sounds pretty. It does sound
there's more,
very reasonable,
right? So
so
refueling the helicopter at that time, you're thinking not a common thing, but funny enough, on October 6th of 1973, the Yom Kippur War erupted when Egypt and Syria, along with 10 other Arab nations, invaded Israel. Now, at that time, we supplied Israel with a crap ton of materials, including helicopters and including a bunch of other things. In that area at that time, it wasn't unusual for refueling to be happening as they moved all of these massive things around to get them ready to ship overseas. So it's possible, just from that alone, that it was happening, that you did have this refueling thing coming on, and they just mistook this helicopter for who they were supposed to refuel and messed up. Not out of the realm of possibility. Far more likely, I think, given that it's a red light. That's always the argument. It's more likely than a UFO or an alien spacecraft. Well, if it's a red light, green light,
let's not use that, because everything is far more likely than that, right? The worst argument you can think of, ball lightning, is more likely. Okay,
no. I disagree. Philip Class is full of shit. Ball lightning's almost never. I've been alive for over half a century. I've never seen ball lightning.
Right.
I've heard people talk about it.
That's my point. But then, it's still more likely.
But I've seen a shit ton of airplanes with red light, green light.
No, that is true. And when I first read this story and first heard about it and saw the interview, that struck me right away as navigation lights on an aircraft. You're right. Of all the colors in the spectrum, why red and green? And then as they moved away, a navigation light, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, but again, we have these experienced men.
So Jesse, who was the new guy on the crew, the co-pilot, he comes on and he said he considered it might just be a plane, but he just didn't understand the lighting configuration. And he didn't see a strobe or a rotation beacon ever.
And the witnesses on the ground. This place, Mansfield, was very close to an airport.
Yeah.
They're only a few miles from an airport. I would assume that the people that live in the area were pretty familiar with what aircraft looked like in the sky at night.
Yeah, that gives me pause as well.
And this seemed to be something different.
Yeah, and helicopter pilots not recognizing it was an airplane, that really threw me as well.
And then the green light that not only lit up the helicopter, but also lit up the ground. Now, they're supposed to be at, 3,000 feet? Or what altitude are they supposed to be at when this incident's happening?
1,700
feet. The helicopter's flooded with the light.
1,700 feet's the lowest reported height that they were based on Captain Coyne's recollection, because that's
whenever
when he
the light hit them, lit up the entire cockpit, and according to the skeptical point of view, it was a large spotlight they use during mid-air refueling. I guess it's possible, right? That's what the explanation is for the bright light that flooded the cockpit, because they're looking for the probe and they want to, obviously they have to have something like that, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, how powerful is that light that it lit up the entire countryside and was green? Now, they said that it was green color. It also was colored green, but it was green because it was shining through the plexiglass of the windshield onto the ground.
Maybe, but I'd have to see that. That seems a little...
seems
a stretch.
Yeah, they said it lit up the ground, the forest around, the trees. And I know that lighting can be incredibly powerful, spotlights and such, but at the same time, why was it green?
Yeah. I'm with you there, assuming everyone's telling the God honest truth, hand on Bible, on the ground. They're not just elaborating.
And then some witnesses came
15 years later.
Came forward like 15 years later and stuff. And even then, your memory can be contaminated by assumptions that have been made on TV. And imagine if you're local events, like that's a local event. I guarantee every year that the anniversary of this incident comes up in Mansfield, it's in the local paper.
Oh, sure.
And they go back and talk to, the people, the witnesses and stuff like that. So if all of a sudden I come forward 15 years later, my memories are going to be affected by the things that I've heard and read all those years, even if I don't think they were. I mean, it's been proven time and time again. Your people's memory, my memory, your memory, everyone's memories are malleable. You begin to remember things differently, and things can change the way you remember it. Nobody wants to believe that, but it's absolutely true. Regardless, I mean, that's not an impossible scenario, but it's still a pretty interesting one. One of the more interesting ones, I think. When you have corroborating witnesses, there's the primary witnesses in the helicopter, and then you have corroborating witnesses that are completely unrelated, don't know each other, and they're seeing the same incident from a different perspective. Those are the ones that are always, very interesting to me. Something was there.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a tanker that mistook that helicopter for one they were supposed to be refueling. But it almost seems to me that if that were the case, that when those guys landed, because they didn't land at Mansfield, they were so scared they flew all the way to Cleveland and were almost out of fuel when they got there. It just seems to me that when they got on the ground and they were talking about this, somebody would have done just a little bit of legwork right there and said, oh, that was that tanker. I mean, it just seems like that would have been so easily solved.
Right, but get this. Just a few things from the people who were there. Yanasek says, the green light was in the cockpit, but I think it came from the greenhouse. It was the green inside the cockpit. The green light also came in through the windshield, which is not tinted. What happened there? It was just a one-shot light. It seemed to swivel. Now, again, whether we flew through it or it swiveled, at any rate, the light traveled across the nose of the cockpit and then up to the green area, and it washed out the entire cockpit. Jesse says, that was the co-pilot. Now, it was mentioned that there was a greenish light that colored the aircraft that turned the huey green for a moment as it went by. I didn't see that or sense it, and I think that since the cockpit has a greenhouse, that is, a green plexiglass roof, that was the effect we saw. This is the co-pilot.
Right. But then keep in mind that the skeptic's idea is that it shined through. What they're talking about, listeners, in case you don't know, okay, think of a helicopter. This is one of those square Vietnam-era Huey helicopters that you've seen in 1,000 war movies and Chuck Norris movies. Very, very common military helicopter. The windshield's clear, and there's clear glass, so when they're landing, they can look down. There's windows in the floor, so they can look down. But there's also windows above them, so they can actually look straight up. But they call it the greenhouse because they're tinted, so that the sun's not blinding them, but they can look through it. So that's what he's talking about when he says the greenhouse. It's tinted plexiglass that's above the heads of the pilots. So the skeptic's idea is that light was shined, a clear light was shined through the greenhouse, the tinted plexiglass at the top of the helicopter, and that's why it appeared green to the people on the ground. Just
they weren't growing plants.
It just seems like a weird angle without being blocked by the helicopter itself. I mean, at what angle was that? Were they behind it and then it's shining through the tint, through the windshield, and then going to the ground? That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, and if it were...
That's the way I understand the angles.
Yeah, and if it was at that angle, then you would likely have noticed, I would think it would be more clear that it's an airplane, but I don't know. So the person on the grounds, it was interviewed by Jones, who was a MUFON representative. He asked, what color was the object, Mrs. C? What do you mean? What color did you see from it? And Mrs. C responds, just the red and the green. Do you mean from the helicopter? No, not from it was from the object above the helicopter. Were the red and the green light the same size? No, the green light seemed smaller. It was not of the same brightness. The green was smaller? Yes, there are different versions. I know the kids have seen something. They say they see something a little different than I do, but I'm just telling you what I saw. Mrs. C was the only adult on the ground to be interviewed by Jones and was the only original ground-based observer for the incident.
Mm-hmm. That reported at the same time this incident, or very shortly after the incident occurred.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't know, man. I think it's still a very interesting case. I like to, learn about all these. So if we ever talk about them again, we can say, well, it's just like the Mansfield case. It's always fun to track these down and learn as much as we can about them. Did you have anything else you needed to add on this story?
I got to say, this Parabunk site is incredibly detailed with graphs, references. They go all the way back to talking about the issues with the radio and compass in great detail.
Okay.
They even asked the question, why wasn't there any investigation done at the time? Because that would have solved this once and for all in terms of what was going on. They found out that no investigation took place at all.
Mm-hmm.
A report was filed with the FAA, and he has a copy of it. Contact was made with higher headquarters, and no investigation was required by them. And no investigation was ever conducted by higher headquarters of any service. FAA Operations Chief P.J. Vollmer told Inquirer that, "We have taken note of the report together with a sketch from Captain Coyne, but there's nothing further we can do. If the other craft had carried identification, we could track it down, but it remains completely and totally unidentified."
I mean, I don't know how to take that. Most likely, they chalked it up for, okay, here we go. It's a UFO thing or whatever. And the FAA does have the authority. We learned this during the JAL, the Japanese Airlines Flight 1628. We did learn that the FAA has the authority to contact the military to get their radar records. So if this was reported to the FAA, it would have been very, very simple for the FAA to reach out to the military, the National Guard, or whoever. I guess the Air Force or the Air National Guard would have been running this tanker. If that's, of course, they didn't know what it might have been. This is just an estimation on this site many years later. But if it was an aircraft, it seems like it would have been very simple to discover that fact.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yep. I mean, flight plans have to be filed. Airplanes have transponders. I mean, just if it was an airplane and anybody wanted to solve this problem, usually the FAA want these things to go away, so they solve them very quickly. And perhaps there was no follow-up. Maybe they just took the drawing and said, okay, you saw a UFO, and just moved on and didn't care, right? Because it was 1973 during a huge UFO flap. There were a lot of UFO sightings and reports during the year of 1973.
And a large military operation going on in Israel.
Yeah, the Yom Kippur War. So, yeah.
And maybe you have some general, Yosemite Sam general, who has a kid who's a tanker pilot who pulls this boneheaded thing. He's like, we'll just cover it up.
Yeah. Or maybe MJ-12, they covered it up. I don't know.
Well,
the Men in Black.
Oh, yeah, my money's on MJ-12. Or maybe MJ-13, those guys.
They're even more secret.
They're so
they're
secret.
One more secret. All right, man. Well, I think let's wrap this one up for the night. What do you think?
I'm all for it, man.
My thunderstorm's over, so it means it's time to clear the episode out. Yeah, to finish her up.
Sounds good, man.
I would like to ask everyone before we get out of here to please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It helps other people find the show. It only takes a moment to scroll down if you're listening on Apple iTunes or Spotify or whatever. Just scroll down, give us 5 stars, and just say, howdy ho, or love the show, or those guys were so stupid I can't stop laughing. Something like that. So whatever you like about the show, put it in there. And also, we would love to hear from you. We've actually seen a little bit of an uptick in people reaching out to the show, and maybe we'll do a listener mail thing sometime. But we're first contact at cosmicsponge.com. Just reach out. Any thoughts you have on the show at all, a topic suggestion. If you have an extraordinary story that you'd like to share with us on the show, or if you wouldn't want to share it, but maybe just share it with us in private, that'd be fine too. Give us a holler. We'd love to hear from you. Jimmy, did I leave anything out?
Nope, I think you covered it all, my friend.
All right. Well, with that being said, this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and we'll see you next week.
And Jimmy Co, keep your eyes to the skies, put your feet on the ground. We'll catch you next week.
Hey, my nose is itching.
Maybe
it's all red and stuff.
You probably got some kind of alien fungi disease.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I got that alien virus. I think I've been visited at night and been abducted.
You've been snorting that alien coke.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. All right, man. Let's get out of here.
Definitely. Coughing.
Coffin? You're going to call in a coffin?
Coughing, man. I don't know.
You're going to be in a coffin if you keep that drink enough.
I'm telling you. I got to lay off the booze.
All right, man.
All right.
We'll see you.
Later. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account at firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. If you'd like to support the show, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/cosmicsponge, where you get access to exclusive content, including our Weird Wonders news and stories released every week. To explore everything Cosmic Sponge has to offer, including other ways to support the show, head on over to our website at www.cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.